Today we have a wonderful show here with Mansi Baxi from Daya, Houston. As Valentine's Day approaches, it is a perfect moment to explore the foundations of love and connection. Today we're thrilled to welcome Mansi from Daya, Houston. It's an organization that is dedicated to empowering individuals, I believe, in my opinion. Okay. So we're so excited to have you here, and I'm ready to know all there is to do with relationships and how we can make them less toxic.
Yeah,
I feel like agree. Right?
Even dating culture is so
toxic.
But first, thank you for having me. It's been a little bit. I think I was here in April.
Oh wow!
Year. Yeah.
So has it been almost a year?
Almost a year. I'm happy to be back.
Yay!
Yeah, we thought it would be great to talk about healthy relationships because Valentine's Day is approaching. February is also Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month.
Yes.
So we can talk a little bit about that too. But yeah, healthy relationships. Relationships really are on a spectrum. Mm-hmm. You have healthy relationships, and then they can sometimes go into an unhealthy relationship, and then the next stage would be abusive relationships.
Oh, yes.
So with healthy relationships, it's really about trust, honesty, good open communication, feeling safe, having more equal power dynamics in that relationship.
Yes.
And then with unhealthy relationships, you might find breaks in communication. There might be pressure to be or say a certain thing because you don't want to make another person upset. You might also feel like there's like a control, like a struggle in control, or some power dynamics where sometimes it feels like a game. And like talking about toxic relationships and dating, we glamorize this idea of the game when it comes to dating and like dating apps and everything. But actually, that's really toxic.
It is,
and it can perpetuate this really negative, continuation of a relationship when it goes out from like just a dating phase to a more secure relationship, because now you've established and you've kind of given up those boundaries very early on in the relationship.
Yes.
And then of course, after an unhealthy relationship, that's when you might have with more control, power dynamics, you have like physical abuse, emotional, verbal abuse, psychological abuse, a lot of accusations, extreme jealousy, possessiveness. Wow. Sometimes, especially in teen dating relationships, young people are like, oh, well, if he's a little jealous, it means he likes me, or blah, blah, blah. But that can have really negative consequences down the line.
It's funny because like when you initially get into a relationship, you never think you're in this like bubble of love and there's that connection and you feel like you're on top of the world, and then when it starts to go the wrong way, it's very hard for some people. I think a lot of us, when you're so in love, to even understand that this is not healthy, this is not the way things should be, and then you're so far in it that you just don't know how to get out of it.
Yeah, and it's fear, right? Fear, the whole negative part of power and control is fear.
Yeah.
And whether it's fear of being alone and then you stay in a relationship, or it's stigma from, your family. We're South Asian, so obviously that's a big part with like not getting a divorce, not getting out of a long-term or committed marriage, of course.
Yeah.
But I have a very close friend of mine, and I'm using a personal example, but I feel like it's relevant because it's what's happening now. And she's 30 years old, almost 30, and she's been dating this guy for the last 6 months. And there's been these little drops of little red flags, and finally it's reached this point where now she has so much anxiety, and now it's taken us, like as her friends and her sister, to kind of make her realize that, hey, this
is not good.
What his thought process is actually him kind of grooming you and gaslighting you and manipulating you. It's gone from healthy to unhealthy, and we want to prevent it from becoming abusive. And it's that anxiety. When you feel that anxiety that you're scared to talk to your partner, I think that's a very small, clear sign that something is not right. You should always feel safe with your partner. And this is regardless of what type of relationship that is.
Right. Wow. So, I always wonder what like the signs are, because like I said, you get into the relationship, everything is perfect.
Yeah.
It's, all rainbows
Like the
and
rom-com.
butterflies. Yes.
But rom-coms end at the happy ever after. They don't show you
They
the after.
don't.
They just show you them, that tension phase of,
Yes.
we've got together, but what happens after? It just ends.
It does. It really does. So how can someone recognize if they are in an unhealthy relationship?
So definitely we call them red flags.
Yeah.
But you might notice that, your partner's putting you down. Or let's say you're out with friends. And this applies even to like people in my mom's age gap,
Yeah.
like age group, or even young people. Like you're out with your friends, and I've seen this happen to so many of my aunts and like aunties and everyone, where the husband is making jokes about their wife at the expense of their feelings, but they're putting them down in public. And there's a fine line between, what is actually a joke and then what kind of is insensitive.
Yeah.
And that act alone is like breaking down somebody's confidence and self-esteem. Other things are like the extreme jealousy or the possessiveness. If you notice that the person is saying, maybe you shouldn't be going out with friends so much. Maybe, I don't want you to go and spend the weekend with your parents, or you should talk to me first. Prioritize me. Call me before you call your parents. These small, and sometimes when a person is doing it, it might come across as very charming. Obviously in an initial stage of dating and things like that, or at the growing part of a relationship. But again, long-term effects. And this exact situation, that friend I was talking about, that's exactly why we were like, hey, now this is getting too far.
Yeah.
Because he was like, oh, well, all things that we do together, we should be doing together, whether it's like going to the movies or going to a museum, even things that I don't like, we should be doing together, or things you don't like, you should do it with me. So she was like, yeah, but I want to plan things with my girlfriends too. Like, it's not just like I'm an independent person. I want to still plan my own life. I like my me time.
Yeah.
And he was just like, no, but like, getting your nails done, that's a girly thing. So y'all go do that.
Oh, wow.
But everything else you should do with me. And we're like... Possessive.
Yeah.
And again, at that early stage. And another thing, that can happen that I've seen is if somebody has not been in a relationship before, regardless of age, if the other person is maybe telling them, you've never been in a relationship before, so you don't know how you're supposed to act. So this is what you should be doing. You should be giving me all your time. You should be wanting to do everything the way we do it together. And this, like, I'm giving you an example literally from people I know, like friends.
Wow.
Not even my clients.
Wow.
Like, this is happening within the younger age group.
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful and, you have to take a step back and really objectively look at your relationship that, wait, he said this or she said this thing, and why did they say it? And is it, everything, it's context. Context is very important, but you really have to analyze and be honest with yourself too sometimes that, is this going the right direction? Some other red flags would be just like explosive or erratic behavior, like maybe somebody who has temper, like anger management problems, where they're very calm and then all of a sudden they might switch and be very aggressive. And of course, I'm not talking about people that like have bipolar and things like that, but if you can see, let's say that for the tiniest thing you do, they get upset and then they really explode and get mad at you, that could be a red flag. Accusing you of things that maybe you haven't done, or gaslighting you into thinking that you have done something that you haven't. There's so many layers to how, a relationship can go from healthy to unhealthy.
Yeah.
And it's really about breaking down self-esteem and confidence.
Yeah.
And then taking that control.
And I feel like it's more there for like the younger, like teenagers especially. And so like, how can parents foster open communications with their teens to create a safe environment for discussing relationships, concerns, and red flags?
Yeah, so I think, within our Desi community specifically, sometimes we don't want to accept or believe that our kids are dating.
Oh, they're not going to date.
They're not going to date until they're in college, right?
No, they're just going to go get straight married. That's it.
Exactly.
That's exactly what's going to happen.
We have that expectation
Yes.
with boys and girls that, you're not allowed to talk to a boy until you're 18 or 21, and then you graduate, and it's like, okay, time to get married, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
And that's why you also have, like, socially awkward people, like young people who don't even know how to interact in general and don't even have good interpersonal communication skills.
It's embedded in their minds.
One thing, again, as parents, we need to be honest with ourselves. Where are our children getting exposed to certain ideas? We have social media, so it's so hard to control a lot of the things that, culturally our parents would maybe have tried to control before, but like no dating, not interacting, or if you can only interact with people, let's say if you go to the temple or whatever, but your kid is going to probably be interested when puberty hits,
Absolutely. Yeah.
They're going to discover things, and there's going to be curiosity. And I think as a parent, accepting
and
that your
open.
child might be interested in that, and instead of kind of shutting that topic out, actually be willing to have an open conversation with them, and creating that safe environment. Again, open communication, trying not to even say statements about other friends or other kids that your child might know, and that might sound like they're judging that other child, right? Because, like, I know from personal example, like, if my mom ever was like, oh, well, that kid was so good, they got straight A's, blah, 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 and then if I didn't, I would feel that shame or guilt before I've even shared it with my parent. So same thing, if, somebody makes a comment that, that kid is so, I don't even know what parents say.
No, and it's very true, because I have caught myself doing it myself. And when I do it, I catch myself and it's like, oh, I can't believe I just did what my mom used to do to me. And I'll catch myself, I'm like, no, stop. And I'm like, I'll change the whole conversation into trying to make her, like my daughters, feel more empowered and more important, whatever subject the conversation is going. But like I have caught myself doing that,
because
that's how
so
you've grown up.
With how you've grown up. I mean, I'm 31. I realize the older I get, I'm turning into my parents too for so many things. So it's. But again, as a parent too, acknowledging that you're doing it and then showing your kid that you can be wrong and then change and model that healthy relationship, model that healthy thought process. And showing them that it's also okay to change your mind about something. So, and that's something, education is the only way in our community that we can be more accepting of and reducing stigma for domestic violence. So I always think, I would, if I was a parent, I'm not a parent, but even if I was, no matter what the situation is, I would never want my child to feel like they can't talk to me. And it might take a lot more work on my side to make them feel comfortable, but then I want my kid to talk to me, so then it's worth doing that work.
Yes, you want them to be able to come to you and feel confident enough to know that you won't be judged, or they won't be judged.
And like, I'm very grateful that my mom, like my parents are generally more open, but my mom was very much of the thought that if I do these XYZ rebellious things with you, then you won't do them in an unsafe environment. And I am like very grateful that she had that outlook, but that's because of her upbringing and what she went through, because she did have to hide. And again, it's all a cycle, right? This generational cycle. So she learned that lesson, so she didn't do it with me. But we can change these things at any time. It's all about how we think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, what are some things parents can do to help their teens date safely?
So having those open conversations, I think even as parents, doing a little bit of research about what teen dating looks like, especially, if you've come from abroad and maybe you don't know the norms. There are websites available called, I had saved one for today, it's called loveisrespect.org, and they solely focus on teen dating violence. And they have a lot of tools about what are healthy relationships, how you can do, like, role plays even with your kid. I know it sounds like maybe something that people don't normally do, But again, actually role playing with your child, like, hey, this is a scenario. What would you do in this situation? And then talking it through. I think, that could be a different method, something that people don't normally think about.
Yeah.
And by doing research as a parent, then you can also communicate with them, trying to be more relatable.
Yeah.
Use examples that maybe you see in media or that might be more on like TikTok or I don't know. Even TikTok for me is a little. My dad spends more time on TikTok than I.
That's funny.
But like trying to be relatable, trying to connect to them emotionally, and then trying to. Have that open conversation. It's like a broken record. Like, be open, have conversations, but that's the only way you can change mindsets.
Yeah.
And then also trying not to judge your child in that vulnerable moment either.
Yeah.
I think when a child is coming to you and being vulnerable, or any person, not even a child, anybody, you want to never make them feel judged in that moment. You want to empathize with them. You want to make them feel supported and safe. And sometimes I even say that if you don't know what to say, and I also think sometimes it's not best to give advice, provide them resources instead.
Yeah.
And provide them support in other ways, or like you can do research to see, like, of course our organization is always there and we have some things on our website, and people can always email us and reach out if they want other tools. But there's so many resources out there if you just Google. But sometimes the best thing is to not even give advice, just give them the resources so we can all be proactive in doing that research. And then
Yeah, I think it's important to have that open communication with your kids, especially with nowadays a lot of things that go on in school, out of school, with their friends. We just don't know, and if you don't have that open communication, then you'll never know. And
like when you're young and you're starting a relationship, you don't know what love feels like, and maybe if you don't have a healthy relationship with your parents, you're going to maybe seek validation elsewhere. Because if you have low self-esteem at home, that whole process of finding yourself, it can take decades. But you will probably seek validation and consolation from other people. So trying to prevent even unhealthy relationships between like parent and child. Can hopefully model.
So it's important for the parents to also show their children that how a healthy relationship between each other
even from parent to child. Because that's the only way you can lead by example.
Right. Wow. So what role does education play in preventing teen dating violence?
I think education is everything, right? Prevention. Think about it like, if this wasn't maybe more of a social issue, and if it was more science-based or medical-based, we would, if somebody might have cancer, we're going to do all this research, try and gain information, but we're more logical and scientific about it. But in the same way, education applies to even social issues like this, or things that might be more emotional-based. Education is everything because it's prevention. You want to prevent something before it happens.
Absolutely.
Again, knowing what a unhealthy relationship is versus a healthy relationship, and knowing those signs, and just educating our kids, even very objectively, even if they're not dating, but maybe at the age of 11 or 12, like your daughter, having that tiny conversation of like, hey, you might notice these different dynamics at school, or if they come home saying that, oh, XYZ has a girlfriend.
That happens, actually.
I'm sure it happens. I remember for us, you would only date when you're 13, but now kids are dating at 8 or 9, and they have boyfriends and girlfriends.
Oh, God.
All sorts of relationships.
It's so funny, and I'm just like, isn't she too young to have a boyfriend? And she's like, well, she has a boyfriend. Okay.
Which, regardless of what they think that means, you can still talk to them about hey, well, a healthy relationship is having good trust and respect in that relationship. Love is not everything. I think that's another thing that we forget. Love is not everything in a relationship.
Yeah.
To me, love is important. That's what keeps you going long term. But if there's no trust and respect, that is not a relationship that anybody would want to feel safe in.
Yeah. I always tell my girls that you are the boss of you.
Yes.
Unless you're home, then I'm the boss of you. But outside of the house, you are your own boss.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you never allow anyone to tell you what you can and cannot do.
Yeah. And it's not just teaching our girls, it's teaching our boys too.
Absolutely.
Teaching our sons, how do you treat all people, regardless of gender, but especially people who identify as women. When you educate your sons also on like the issues that women might face, then you educate them on how to overcompensate and treat them with respect, and treat them well. So teaching healthy behaviors to boys, I think, is so important.
Yeah.
And removing that stigma and that mindset so that then they can lead by example amongst their friend groups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always feel like it's what you said, lead by example, right, in the house or with your children, with your spouse or significant other. I always feel like the abusers, I feel like, have had experiences that has led them to believe that this is how you're supposed to treat your significant other, right? So I feel like everything that you do in the house, it matters so much more. And so when they're out there in the real world, they're able to treat their loved ones the way that they need to be treated.
And also, maybe one parent is more open to these suggestions and implementing these things, but the other parent isn't.
Yeah.
So then that begs another question of, wait, is even the relationship I'm with the other parent, is that a healthy relationship?
Because you're not in sync.
Yeah, because again, that means that there's some breaks in communication.
Yeah.
So again, it takes a lot of work, and there's no right or wrong answer of how to get there. But I think consistency, even if it gets hard, take a breather, but then come back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you give us some examples of relationship red flags?
Yeah, so I think we already talked a little bit about like the jealousy, making jokes, being super jealous, possessiveness. I even think that like excessive gift giving can sometimes be a little uncomfortable because, it's like you're bombarding somebody with gifts and flowers or whatever, but if that other person is not comfortable receiving them, and if you're sometimes doing it in a manipulative way, and it's out of context again, or if somebody has tried to set a boundary, but then you're still trying to invade their boundary or invade their space by giving them gifts, it's like love bombing.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about love bombing before, but love bombing is another red flag. Trying to make it seem like the other person is perfect all the time. That's a red flag. Not being able to have constructive, even just constructive, calm conversations.
Even love bribing.
Yeah, that's
Love
true.
bribing. Oh, that's a new one. Yeah.
What, can you talk about love bribing?
I just thought, like you said, love bombing. And
Yeah.
I thought it could be love
Bribing.
as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, I'm doing all this for you.
Yeah, when spouses have fights and when they want to
Ah.
and if they're not giving in, they go give a gift.
That's
and
the honeymoon phase. So when we
Yes.
talk about the cycle of abuse, right? I know we have, and we bring it up often, that honeymoon phase is exactly that. It's the begging for forgiveness. I'm going to buy you gifts. It's love bombing, but yeah, I think that's another good idea and like way of shifting that term, that it's love bribing, because it really is.
Yeah.
Until,
That's a good one.
Yeah, I love it. That was great. I'm going to bring that up in our CS meeting.
That's a very good one. That's what I was like, oh, I've never heard of that. That was
really,
good.
I love that. Love bribing. Because it is.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So do all healthy relationships like these, unhealthy relationships always start out that way?
I don't think that they always do. I think that when you don't know
with time.
It's with time. And again, when you're so wrapped up in the love of everything, and I really think it is possible to be blind in love. I know I have. And it's so easy to ignore when we never want to see that another person can do anything wrong. Or we believe that, well, they love me, so they would never hurt me.
Yeah.
We think that, they have your best interest. But that, again, not always the case.
It's not always the case, yeah.
And even like in our South Asian community, if we have like so much pressure to stay in a relationship, whether it's arranged or even just, you know, how we have like family friends be like, oh, well, y'all should be a couple or whatever.
Kind of like a forced relationship almost.
Well,
hold that thought.
Yeah, matchmaking. That's sitting on team matchmaking.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. We're going to take a quick break here on 103.5 Hum FM. You're listening to your Chai Time Girls. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Chai Time here on 103.5 Hum FM. For those of you who have just tuned in, we are in conversation with Mansi Baxi from Daya, Houston on healthy relationships. So, I know that we've spoken a lot about romantic relationships, but how do unhealthy relationships affect families?
So I think it especially affects our South Asian community a lot. You know, in a lot of situations, I think there's so much power and control from parents, especially in immigrant communities when there's a lot of pressure, you know, leaving our countries, coming abroad. There's burdens from finances, and we want to make sure that our children have a great education and that American dream. But with that American dream also comes so much pressure. And sometimes, you know, a misunderstanding or needing to learn about a new culture. And we have young people who feel so split between cultures and feel like they may not fit into either the Desi community or into the Indian community. You know, I felt that so many times where I'm too Indian for my American friends, but I'm too American for my family. Like even this past December, January, I went home to India, and it was the same thing. Like, you're the American one, you're this. And I think we have to remember that certain experiences are shared differently. Like, there are those differences, but as a parent, we don't always think that when we're going to leave our country and come to another country that our child is going to be in this position where they may feel isolated or feel that pressure to conform into the more Western society. So with that, there can be a lot of dynamics from the parent, again, with that pressure of, let's say, education. Or the thing we talked about of no dating until you go to college, the obsessive focus on college, which of course, I believe in college and good education, but that tiger mom concept. And, you know, when parents are sometimes very controlling and they're constantly telling you what to do, but it's always instilling fear. It's not allowing that child to communicate back to the parent, because even in our community we have the dynamics of respecting your elders. You can never question what they tell you. You can never speak back. It's so multi-layered. So parents can sometimes become controlling without even realizing that they're doing it, or without having that intention. And as a young child, you're not even going to, you can only look at your parents objectively as an adult or as a, you know, older young adult to maybe understand why your parent was restrictive or had those methods of discipline. But as a child, you're just feeling scared and lost. So, you know, any behaviors that cause a child to feel fear. And that is honestly where I also feel like breaking down self-confidence starts. And that's when then you have teenagers, then they go to high school or junior high or whatever, and then they're like, oh, well, mom and dad are like really mean and controlling at home, and they blame me for everything. They're criticizing me all the time. I can never do anything right. And then they try and seek solace in from somebody in a relationship in school. Also, like, blaming, like parents never taking responsibility for their actions. And again, the generational cycle of abuse, it's so ingrained that we don't even realize that we are perpetuating that abuse back, or those toxic behaviors back, because it was our norm, or it was our parents or grandparents' norm. Like, that's how they handled any situation or disciplined their children.
Yes.
It was by having that like iron fist and that control.
Yeah.
You know, being overly critical about grades, about performing, about getting into college, being a straight A student, being in top 1%, getting a full scholarship.
Just listening to it, like my anxieties are going up.
Yeah,
because
like
I can't
know that
imagine
I
as a
felt-
child, right?
As that child, I felt so much pressure of like, I have to succeed to make my parents' American dream be successful.
Yes.
And I think sometimes parents don't realize that pressure we put on ourselves. So when we have that pressure being put constantly on top of us.
Yeah, it's like I gave up my life over there to bring you a better life
Like,
here.
I came here with,
Yeah.
you know, $200 in my pocket. That's the same story.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's true, because
Yeah.
at some point, it's like, when is that a life lesson? But now, when is that manipulation?
Yeah.
When is that you gaslighting me again and again?
Yeah.
Are you not letting me be my own person? You not respecting my boundaries? You invading my space or going through my things all the time? Which, again, I know there's a difference between healthy parenting and
Yes.
discipline, but also, like, I've had a lot of clients actually that are college students,
Yeah.
and they're dealing with this really abusive, toxic relationship with their parents. You know, really sad things like, oh, and of course, I can't even forget having a daughter instead of a son. That can cause so much more abuse to the daughter.
Yeah, I wanted a son, and
I
we
wanted
got
a
you.
son, and then therefore treating the daughter like she's non-existent,
Yeah.
or a burden on the family.
Yeah.
And then of course
All that mental health, right?
it's so much mental health and trauma and like unlearning that then
Yes.
that child has to do when they're a young adult, and then they're going to maybe keep finding themselves in this pattern of
a
finding themselves
cycle.
in it's a cycle of being in unhealthy relationships until you really find who you are and healing.
Yeah.
From
I feel
all of that
like
past
the
trauma.
responsibility of a parent is so much deeper and so important. Like, it's, you can make or break your child. And like, just hearing this, I'm just like, oh my God, there's so many things that, like, every time you guys are on our show, I always learn something different.
Yeah.
And every time I'm trying to improve the way that I parent, because I want my kids to grow up to be healthy individuals and, you know, mentally healthy and just thrive in this world and become who they are meant to be. But that has to start at home, right? And
It's
you
so
have
sad
to.
because like I've had clients where, and sometimes I've even seen that it's perpetuated more from the mother, not even the father, because the mother might feel like, well, I was trapped in a marriage, or I was treated this badly by my in-laws, or I was treated this way by my parents, therefore I have to indirectly take it out on my child. I had a client where her mom used to feed her spoiled food, or, you know, take Social Security. I know this is extreme cases, but I've seen this consistently, like working with clients, taking a child's Social Security number, opening up credit cards without their consent or their knowledge, and then they have like a terrible credit score and credit card debt before they're
already
even
like
21 years old.
exactly.
So, you know, again, being objective, analyzing as a parent, am I really harming my child or am I helping them? And sometimes listening to a child is so much more important than again speaking. Like, I always think of Deepika Padukone, the actress, right?
Yeah.
I know that I had seen this interview of hers, like, I don't know, when I was like 20 or something, and I would like repeat it to my parents all the time that, well, Deepika said this, so I believe in this. She basically, her dad was a badminton, like world-class badminton player, and I think he didn't know how to help her navigate Bollywood, but she knew who she is, and she knew how she could, and she was willing to take that risk and maneuver it, and she told him that, I know what I want and who I am more than you do. So you need to trust me that sometimes, you know, sometimes the child does know what's best for them and the parent doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think when a parent, and that to me is a break in communication between parent and child.
Yeah.
Because as a parent, you're not looking at your child objectively.
No, you're not. Exactly. Very
And,
true.
You know, it's so complex, but I always think of that example of
I love that.
hey, sometimes I do know what's better for me
Yeah.
and you don't. And if you listen to me and hear me out, you can support me.
Yeah.
And then I don't have to feel alone in that path.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so beautiful. Wow. Yeah. So, what are challenges and barriers for South Asian survivors?
so many things. Language access, transportation, isolation. You know, we live in Texas. It's a driving city.
It is, yep.
So you can't survive without a car. And so many clients, you know, if you don't have funds to pay for Ubers and Lyfts everywhere, buses aren't always, like, public transportation is not a reliable source in all cases.
Right.
You know, isolation and stigma within the community, you know, fear of speaking up that you might be having or being in an unhealthy or an abusive relationship. There could be religious abuse. Maybe your partner doesn't respect all of your beliefs or the rituals that you perform. Lack of trust, even within the systems, you know, as immigrants. Well, it's lack of knowledge, but also lack of trust. Like so many things that are happening in our political climate, there is a lot of fear to seek help from our law enforcement. And sometimes, you know, negative experiences with law enforcement is what prevents you from seeking help in the future. I've seen that with a client where she called police because her husband was being physically abusive, but then the husband somehow manipulated the cop during the interview process. And I think there was like a Ring camera on the front door, so the cop had interviewed her outside and then the husband inside the home, but he was watching the Ring camera and then manipulated and changed his story to the cop. So actually she got charged. So there's so much fear and distrust in the law enforcement, and it's like, how do you get justice, you know? Like lack of trust in our systems is a big one, even with healthcare. You know, there's different questions that are being asked nowadays. You know, immigration abuse, also like in-law abuse. There are so many barriers, I think.
Wow. That's so sad. So what are some things we all can do to maintain healthy relationships?
I think setting boundaries is the key. And I think doing it at an early stage in a relationship, if possible. And even if it's, you know, if you are in an abusive relationship and sometimes you try to set boundaries, it can sometimes escalate the abuse. So you really, again, have to analyze, is this a relationship I even want to stay in? And, you know, as people supporting others, we have to be mindful. It can take 7 to 8 tries for someone to flee an abusive relationship. So not isolating a friend, let's say, who's really struggling to leave and maybe keeps trying consistently, but it may feel like, oh, but they're not actually taking that step. But it takes, when your confidence has been broken down so deeply, it can really take so much out of you, and there's so much fear that you have to dig down and find that strength to eventually leave. And you have to feel safety from like an organization like Daya, but even your friends and whoever close individuals that you have to make you feel safe. But talking about other boundaries, you know, communicating to your partner, I don't like this or I like this. Being like sharing, like if with more like emotionally setting your boundaries, talking about what your needs are, talking about like your love language or your attachment style, so that you can better understand. When you better understand yourself, you can communicate to your partner or to anybody that you have a relationship with who you are. Right. And same goes vice versa. So then keeping that in mind, let's say if you do get in an argument and then they kind of might be avoidant in that situation, but maybe you're more of like an anxious attachment style, but remembering, hey, it's not personal, you're avoidant, so I'm not going to take it personally. We will come back and revisit this. You know, using our words, again, verbal, trying to avoid gaslighting situations, with a little bit of like safety planning, setting boundaries with digital things, like passwords and keeping your access to your social media accounts, and like being clear about, you know, maybe I don't want you to go through my photos and my text messages. Like that's a boundary that I have, and I need you to trust me. Sometimes that's a really hard one for couples because,
like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, I would never go through my husband's phone or vice versa.
I think, I think people, when they've been cheated on, can have that fear and be quite insecure. But
that's true.
Again, that begs another question of, you know, some inner work or inner healing that you need to do to trust in a new relationship. But But then as the other person, being mindful that, you know, they might feel this way, so then I need to also make them feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But setting specific boundaries and being vocal and, like, being very sure about them, even, like, physical boundaries about what is consent, like in a sexual situation, what is safe, what is not safe.
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about marital rape and things like this before. Just because you're married or in a relationship doesn't mean that it's consensual.
Yes.
And context is very important, even if somebody's giving you consent.
Yeah.
They might be saying yes, but if they feel pressured or they're scared, then that context matters. It's really not a yes, it's a no.
Yeah.
And then, you know, like other things like I need some space, or even with like alcohol and drugs, you know, we all have different comfortabilities with these things. So really talking to your partner and like setting those boundaries of like, I'm comfortable with this, I'm not comfortable with this.
Yeah.
And doing that early, I think is
is important.
Good,
yeah. So can you share some resources with us?
Yeah, so of course, our website, thehouston.org. You can email us at any time at contact@thehouston.org. And then our helpline number is 713-981-7645. Then again, I think loveisrespect.org is a great resource for parents and even teenagers to just look at and, you know, learn more about teen dating violence and awareness and tools that parents and kids can use. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for this abundance of information that you have provided with us today. Unfortunately, we are out of time.
I love that other question of yours about
I know. I wanted to ask this question, but we have to end our show. But I am going to keep this question for next time. Thank you again for joining us here on Chai Time. We appreciate you, and you know the amount of information that you share with us. It really goes a long way because I know our listeners definitely get a lot from it, but so do we. So thank you. Till next time, thank you for joining us here on Chai Time on 103.5 Hum FM. We will see you next time, same place. Thank you. Bye.